So really quickly, before I jump into kind of the next segment and talk about how we aggregate our logs into metrics, some of the stuff that Catherine was just talking about, so being able to go search your log lines. So this is quite simple in the sense that, again, you can basically search for exact text. I can search for regex. And as this is doing it, it will go pull up and highlight any of that within my logs that I have searched. There's also been some questions in there around performance of some of this. So if I'm trying to tune some of my performance as I'm going through and querying in Loki, we have the inspector in here that's going to let me do different types of things to notice, what was the total request time, number of queries that I'm doing, total number of rows that are returned, and all sorts of different stuff that's kind of coming back on this. So I can see the data source stats, basically how much data did I query, how much did I filter as it was coming back to my results, all of these different types of things to be able to see this. Once I have that information, I can do different types of things. If I wanted to export the JSON for this, I can do that. If I just wanted the data that exists from that query, I can go look at the data that came back from this query. I can download the CSV or even just the full log file if I want to from those specific components. So there's quite a lot of features and functionality that exist in here to let you search and explore your logs. Now with that, I want to talk just a little bit, I guess, around how we really go from a raw log line into, again, some of those metrics that we want to be able to view. So when we look at just what a raw log line looks like here, so if I zoom in a little bit, when we are kind of picking and choosing what we want to view on a specific dashboard, we're able to really quickly just say, well, I want to see just any of my labels I can pick in here, and then I can choose to just show this as a visualization of logs. So instead of all of my different visualizations I have in here, down at the bottom, we have just show me the logs. That's what I want to see. I want to add this as a component to my report. So this is going to give me just the raw log lines that are coming back out of this. I can then go, obviously, search into each one of these as I see fit. Now, as we kind of bring those on, we might want to format them a little bit. So again, raw log lines are not exactly the prettiest thing in the world. So what if I wanted to see my log lines, but I wanted to go add something else to them? So here's where we get into line formatting. So again, we can kind of take that specific log file that we just were cruising or looking through and be able to then format this into specifically components that I want to see on here. So if I wanted to go just pick certain variables that are coming out of my log line because there's a lot of text that might be in there and I don't want to have all of that sitting on my dashboard, I can go pick and choose the specific items that I want to come out of this. And I can even do things like conditional formatting in here. So if I wanted to say, if it's an error, I want it to display a certain way. If it's a success, I want it to display a different way. So there's a lot of different kind of features and functionality that exist in here that let me choose how I want to display my logs on dashboards. The next piece that we want to take that comes from this is, how do we get these into metrics? So when I go look at these from a metrics standpoint, right, we can start to aggregate them. And this, again, is what Catherine just kind of walked through, where if I want to go see the formulas behind this, so for example, here, I'm just doing a count over time of my production logs and 5-minute intervals. And then I just want the total sum of those. So this is giving me all of my logs over those 5-minute interval and just give me a total count of those because I want to see what's going on. Now, this isn't giving me a ton of information. Usually what you'll want to see is things like error rates and some of those different components, which we'll get into in just a minute here when we go look at some different dashboards. We can also kind of pivot some of these different areas as we see fit to say, well, maybe I want to sum these by something specific. So we can start to break these out, not just as individual metrics, but I can break them out into the different components that I want to see here. So for example, this is going across all of our beasts. I've changed the legend to be just that. If I take that off, what you'll see is it will go back to kind of what that label was and be able to see what's there. Whereas if I do this, we'll be able to see this with the actual values that I wanted. Now I've also added some thresholds in here, which is why you see these different colors. It gives you a lot of the same kind of options that you would have normally in here. So for this example, I just said, great, show me some different thresholds that exist in here, and I can pick and choose those. So it's going to give me some different colors as I see fit. And then lastly, what I want to kind of look at is, well, how do I trend these over time, right? And so that's when we start getting into a little bit more of details of, great, this is all of those same components, but I wanted to trend them specifically over time into different intervals. So that's kind of the exact same thing as we just did, whereas we are looking at the kind of stat or gauge chart for those previous values. What this one is doing is going across that time series. So instead of calculating it just for that last interval that I'm looking at, it's going to calculate it across that interval for the period of time that I have selected here. So I'll be able to see all of that different log data aggregated into a metric that I might want to analyze and bring all of this stuff together, all coming out of just a log file. So what this looks like when you start kind of putting these things together into really great looking dashboards is something like this, where we have this Nginx dashboard. So if you haven't gone to this, so obviously everybody has access to this specific demo environment that you can get off of GitHub. This other environment, play.grafana.org, is a public sandbox that we have. So you can also go here and see some examples of different types of charts and components, as well as specific data source items. So here, when we're looking at a dashboard, I want to see things like, what are my requests per status code? I want to see, what percentage of requests are 500s. I can see what percentage of requests are coming from Googlebot as I go through this. And again, it has some of the different items that we just kind of went over. So how do I do, log formatting to be able to view it the certain way that I want to? How do I do some different trends to be able to see things like status codes over time, quantiles, total number of bytes sent? One of the last things that I want to show really quickly, which is quite neat, is getting into a bit of, what do these logs look like when we start kind of parsing them? So we talked about patterns and how we can break those up. So if I looked at just what these logs look like to start with here and run this query, all of these logs are coming in really, what you would expect from a log format, right? So this is a bunch of JSON. It's not exactly easy to read. This, if I had to go search through it, is not really user-friendly. I can go do specific text searches and find what I want to, but at the end of the day, it's just not that great. So what I want to be able to do is break this into different components. So I see that this is JSON, right? So by just parsing it into that format, what it will now show me is prettifying this JSON. I can see this actually broken into, the actual components or the values that exist in these key value pairs, right? So I want to be able to see this with a little bit more form and functionality so that it's more human readable as I go through this. And then lastly, like we were doing before, we can put the line format in here to say, show me just the different components that I want and the different statuses. And that's where you get to kind of this end state to see what I might want to.